Hello and welcome to Beaverdale Books. I love it when we have a full house. Thanks so much for coming out and joining us for tonight's book talk. Before we begin, see, I'm the marketing person, so I always have to do a couple little advertisements. So tomorrow night, that's the 20th, we have Steve Grove coming, and he is going to share his book, How I Found Myself in the Midwest. He's going to be in conversation with Reka Basu, and which should be just a fascinating talk because both of them they've come and gone and they're back in the Midwest. Steve is actually the publisher of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, but he worked in the tech industry in California for many years, and now he's in Minnesota. He actually came back to work for Governor Walz, and then now is the CEO and publisher of the Minnesota Star-Tribune. And the reason he's going to be in Des Moines is they're moving their printing operation to Des Moines. And so I called up Reka, and she's going to come, and they're going to share their experiences. So it should be fascinating. Then on Friday, we have open mic poetry night, and that's going to be with contributors to a wonderful little project called the Poetry Potluck Anthology. And that starts at 7 p.m. So if you're into poetry at all, whether you read it, write it, just like to listen to it, we will have Kelsey Bigelow and Caleb, the Negro artist, Rainey. They will be here, and they're emceeing, and it is, I guarantee, it's just the most fun event. We do this quarterly, and we had an 80-year-old man who wrote a sonnet to his wife and read it to her, which was just so wonderful. And then we've had young people, we've had spoken word artists, you name it. We've just got the whole gamut of all kinds of poets. So that's it for my ads, except for, did y'all get this in the mail? Because this is our holiday catalog, and we have extras up front, so every book in here is 10% off. So if you're going to be doing any book shopping, this is the place to do it. Now, on to the program. Being open to awe is the experience. Savoring that experience is the spiritual discipline. This unique companion for the spiritually adventurous explores both the awe and the savoring in 12 chapters that include both stories, quotes from others, examples, line drawings, and questions for reflection and discussion. Savoring Awe both challenges and inspires. Tim Diebel is a native Texan. I think most of you know him. A retired Christian church parish pastor, a musician, a curious and creative wanderer, an avid reader and writer. And since 2011, he has lived on a Warren County, Iowa farmstead with his wife, Lori, learning to grow food and savor awe. Together, they tend a large vegetable garden, a native prairie, a flock of laying hens, and an occasional recalcitrant rooster, honeybees, and a myriad of fruit trees, all under the watchful eye of their two beloved Welsh corgis. Tim is also the author of Home by Another Way, Harvesting Taproot's Wisdom. So please join me in a very warm welcome for Tim Diebel.
Thank you for coming. I'm wearing this Britney Spears microphone, but I will promise you I'm not going to dance. The other thing I'm not going to do is in other settings, there's some songs that get interspersed with this that I thought I would spare you tonight, the music. So we're just going to talk, but you can hum if you like.
Hum along with Tim.
Hum along with Tim, that's it. So, thank you very much for coming. You humble me by your company tonight. The book has been a fun project for me that began with embarrassment which you'll hear more about in a moment. What I propose is, that's not true. That's just what I'm going to do because you don't get a vote. I'll talk a little bit, I'll read a little bit, I'll talk a little bit, I'll read a little bit. And then once I'm finished, if you have questions or comments or arguments or disagreements, those are all welcome. So, but at the end, we'll have time for that, and if you have queries. There's an old gospel song that isn't heard all that often these days, but once upon a time was commonly heard, particularly this time of year. The gist of the chorus goes, count your blessings, name them one by one, count your many blessings, see what God has done. Bing Crosby took up the theme by advocating that same practice for very different reasons in that perennial classic White Christmas, when he was trying to coach Rosemary Clooney on how to combat her nagging insomnia. Do you remember? If you're worried and you can't sleep, then count your blessings instead of sheep, and you'll fall asleep counting your blessings. Chances are that in a little over a week, sitting down perhaps with family and friends around a groaning table, you will devote yourself to a little of that same holy mathematics. Because the truth is, we're surrounded by blessings ripe for the numbering, which is to say, this is a pretty beloved season. I don't know if he spent any time at all counting them, but Albert Einstein recognized the salutary benefits of such attention to blessings, to the wondrous surroundings this way. He wrote, the most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It's the source of all true art and science. He to whom the emotion is a stranger, who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. His eyes are closed. Well, I experienced the abrupt realization a couple of years ago that Einstein was talking about me. And it awakened in me the conviction that I wasn't quite ready to be dead. I wasn't quite ready to close my eyes. And so the only course remaining was to open them. I realized all this one winter morning, as I say, a couple of years ago, that I wasn't paying attention anymore. Inured to my surroundings, I was just going through the motions, even on this bucolic farmstead where we've lived since 2011, amidst trees and chickens and in season, flowers and fruits and vegetables, and in every season, wide open sky. But I had ceased to notice. And so, as I walked back from the chicken yard, back toward the house, I resolved to plug back in. And so began the journey that became this book. On a wintry, snowy morning, I claimed awe in this frigid January morning as my intention for the year. And it was a good year in many ways. Darkness was growing fragile as the night was waning. I had more than my usual chores to accomplish before light emerged, and so I ventured carefully out back. The chickens' feed and water needed replenishing before releasing them for the day. Frosty, now on this February morning, my breath smoked outward with every exhalation. Focused on my mundane work, scooping the feed and refilling the reservoirs, it wasn't until I turned to return to the house that I saw the pageant. Hoarfrost sleeved the bare branches in that liminal space between darkness and light. Skyfire red asserted the morning's birth in the east, while a half moon benedicted the darkness in the west. It was a strikingly vivid moment, awe-filling. I could only pause and take it in. Pause, that is, and smile at what was suddenly a magnificent morning. It was, of course, ephemeral, a touch of fairy dust that caught my attention. Within minutes, the moment had passed. The frost melted into simple wetness. The orange-red sprays of light coalesced into that single yellow dot well into its ascent. The half moon settled into its slumber below the far horizon. And I could finally exhale the breath that it caught with the sight. Well, as if to punctuate the impermanence of that breath-gripping moment, the next morning could not have been more different. Instead of vivid colors and furry frost, this one dawned dressed in a simple monochromatic gray. Could have been today. The air itself, thick with fog, receded into an ashen sky around and above, as though the very trees, the chickens, and all the other scurrying lives were wine fermenting in a cement cask, including me. Which is not to suggest that there was nothing in this more muted morning to notice, to absorb, to relish, to respond to with a smile, just to acknowledge that whatever it is would not grab me by the lapels and demand my attention. Perhaps that prior morning was like the incandescent younger season of life, when we're just launching into our chosen pursuits. Everything seems vivid, alive, and inspiring. Our eagerness and aspirations make wonder easy, natural, expected. A few decades in, however, and life can slip into routine. Youthful and vocational nerve endings are dulled, the seasons turn grayer, foggier, awe becomes much more rare. As I learned on that cement-colored morning at age 66, I'd have to look more closely, listen more attentively, discern more patiently, because awe itself is ephemeral, and it needs to be savored as we grow into middle age and beyond. And so began my journey into the twin parts of this experience. First awe, and then savoring. It's interesting to me, awe is having a bit of a moment these days. The cover of AAA magazine over the awe. On the Today Show focused on the psychological benefits of awe. Just last month, the online magazine BigThink.com featured a story on the 8 sources of awe. It seems like everywhere you look, somebody's talking about awe. And I get that, because it's a pretty big deal. I mean, I don't know how you experience awe, or how you might define it. I rather like William James's conclusion that awe is, quote, an ineffable emotional experience of being in relation to what we consider divine. But that sounds a little elevated. Maybe awe is a good bit like obscenity, as characterized at least by Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart back in 1964, who said, "I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it." We know awe when we experience it, and we want more of it. And the possibilities are endless. The ancient Celts recognized the soulfulness of everything in creation. Humans, to be sure, but rocks and birds and trees as well, along with animals and waves and flowers. Indigenous peoples around the world have echoed that animated understanding of all of creation. When Jacob, the Hebrew trickster, woke up after that transformational night in the wilderness, he didn't marvel, wow, this is lovely. No, he proclaimed, this is the very gate of heaven. When Moses turned aside to see more closely the bush that was burning without being consumed, he didn't merely hear the crackles and pops of a fire. He heard the voice that had spoken creation itself into being, who told him, take off your shoes because the place on which you're standing is holy ground. These people were experiencing what those ancient Celts would later refer to as a thin place, where the veil between heaven and earth, between eternity and immediacy, thins to a kind of gossamer transparency. Place is more than pretty, more than useful, more than a pantry for us to pillage. It's holy, animated by the very breath of the Holy Spirit, imbued with divine fingerprints, the source of all life. But perhaps in order to notice it, we sort of have to get out of the way. The late Phyllis Tickle, who was an author and a publisher and a literary critic, lived with her family on a farm outside of Memphis, Tennessee for most of her adult life, most of her married life. And there she experienced the seasons and the farm animals and their wilder counterparts. She experienced birthing and dying and storms and erosions. And at one point, reflecting on what she had learned there, Tickle noted in a speech, out here we aren't the measure of anything. We're never going to win out here. The whole Enlightenment and Western civilization in the last 300 years is built on the notion that people are the measure of all things. But that's bull, she said. She might have said more than that. Humans, she continued, are the measure of absolutely nothing. But you forget that when you're in the city and everything is scaled to us. Everything I touch here is alive. Out here, nothing is an object. You're caught in majesty. It doesn't require anything of you except, yeah. But as Tickle implies, that sense of awe requires some humility. A beneficial humility beckoning us back into card-carrying membership with the rest of the whole community of creation. And from there, an entirely different view comes clear, at once vast and expansive and infinitesimally small. Brother Lawrence was a French monk of the 17th century. And in the monastery, he was assigned for many years to work in the kitchen. He hated it. Ultimately, later in life, they gave him a promotion. He got to repair sandals. It was in the course, though, of those menial tasks that he came to a spiritual practice he later wrote about in what became a spiritual classic called Practicing the Presence of God. Still in print today. In it, he speaks of the discipline of seeing God in the most ordinary of motions, peeling potatoes, washing dishes, kneading bread, sewing leather. I suggest that what Brother Lawrence calls practicing the presence of God is sort of what I mean by opening oneself to experiences of awe, of entering every moment with an expectancy of something crackling with electricity. One of my favorite singer-songwriters is a woman named Carrie Newcomer. She's from a Quaker from Indiana. And she could be channeling Brother Lawrence in this song that she has called Holy as the Day is Spent, that begins, holy is the dish and drain, the soap and sink and the cup and the plate, warm wool socks and the cold white tile, shower heads and good dry towels and frying eggs that sound like psalms, with bits of salt measured in my palm. It's all a part of a sacrament, as holy as the day is spent. Later on, she talks about the familiar room and the quiet moments in the afternoon and folding sheets like folding hands to pray as only laundry can. Is that just marvelous? In the book, I compare this experience with a wine tasting lesson that Lori and I stumbled upon a number of years ago in Beaune, France. It was our last day in Burgundy, and having stopped at a few shops to purchase a fresh baguette, some meat and cheese, and of course, a bottle of wine, my wife Lori and I were hiking out toward the surrounding vineyards to enjoy a simple picnic. On our way into the countryside, we passed an unassuming storefront with a sign that suggested something about a cave and guardian angels and wine. We hadn't learned much French, but it sounded intriguing. We stepped inside only to find a vestibule and a set of stairs descending indeed into a cave full of shelves and wine. And tending the curious space was a gentleman named, you can probably guess what this guy's name was. Of course, it was Pierre, who in impeccable English kindly asked how he could help us. Well, a brief exchange resulted in the scheduling of a wine tasting later that afternoon, and we retraced our steps up the stairs and out into the surrounding vineyards. Well, if the ensuing picnic was a surreal delight, lounging on a blanket amid historic vines and ripening fruit, the tasting later that day under Pierre's firm tutelage was extraordinary. At the appointed hour, we once again descended the stairs into the cave below, where we took our places at a large table joined only by Pierre. No one else was present. It was just the three of us, and an indeterminate number of bottles, and an announced hour ahead of us in which to taste and learn. Well, those 60 minutes passed, however, with words rather than wine. We talked. Pierre discoursing and inserting questions I later realized were strategic tests to discern our previous wine tasting experience, some, and our relative expertise, little, and taking the measure of our interest in learning more, quite a lot. Well, the first hour led into a second, and then a third, during which Pierre took our figurative hands and led us patiently, incrementally through the nuanced steps of wine tasting. Well, I go into some detail about Pierre's methodology. It involved first one nostril and then another nostril, and and it went from there. It was an excruciatingly wonderful detail about how you sample a glass of wine. In the course of 3 hours, I think we probably had maybe 4 sips because we took about an hour per sip. But it's also to say that tasting is inherently a bodily experience. It is embodied. It involves every one of our senses. He wanted to pay attention to what's the temperature of the room. What happens when the glass warms up? What do you smell? What are you listening to? Before we ever got to putting something in our mouth and then going through all of those steps with that, this totality of the experience that is surrounding and inherent in the act of tasting. Well, similarly, I would argue, experiencing awe isn't a matter of leaving our inner selves behind, but rather rejoining our head and heart and spirit to the rest of our bodies and opening our whole selves to the inbreaking of wonder in all of its manifestations. And it doesn't just happen around a table or pouring from a glass. It doesn't just happen in nature. It happens wherever we happen to be open to it. Well, following each chapter in the book, I include, just as a homage to our tasting experience, something called a tasting note, which for me in the book was just an example of one particular moment when I managed to be present in ways that lead to awe. I got to tell you, it doesn't happen with me any more than it happens with you, but these were some of my success stories. And one of those tasting notes involves an interrupted bit of yard work. One day outside, we were doing our chores, and Lori discovered a blue jay dangling, entangled and dangling in the netting above a portion of the chicken yard. We were pretty sure it was dead, but when we approached, its eye blinked. I'd never looked intimately into the eyes of a bird. Preferring to keep their distance and sustain their motion, they flutter off at the slightest movement into the fathomless air or up to a nearby branch and then another. I'm no stranger to the feather patterns and the sound of their song, but their eyes have remained strangers. Until that is this blue jay held my gaze quietly, without so much as a shiver, while dangling helplessly, precariously from the net in my hand. Perfectly round, this eye was a fathomless pool of blackness, a remnant drop of the primordial waters that once covered the earth and into which the Creator spoke beckoning, shaping, enlivening words. It seemed as though that epic pool had receded into the banks of that single eye, in this single bird, quivering in my helpless hand. The bird peered so piercingly at me, I feared for my conscience. And what there the bird might see. Well, I'll let you read how it all turned out. So, could we learn some skills, I wonder, that enable such awe-filled moments to linger, to last a little longer? It might not surprise you to hear me say, I think so. In the book, I use the culinary metaphor of fond. You know what fond is? You do. Fond are those crusty little scraped bits on the bottom of a pan, like after you fried a chicken or browned a roast. You know, you scrape it up and it's all that kind of crunchy goodness on the bottom. Well, I think that's an apt comparison. Fond is a never diminishing, always challenging fascination to Lori and me. I understand the science of it. how it comes to be. There's this thing called the Maillard reaction. I understand the culinary potential of it. And while I appreciate technical approaches, no explanation expresses nor elevates the crunchy richness of Epicurean residue, like simply scraping a bit of it off the pan and tasting it, allowing the unctuous fireworks to explode in your mouth with the very first crunch. It is gastronomic afterglow. Or, as I like to think of it, the footprints of where glorious goodness has walked. Footprints of where glorious goodness has walked. Culinary afterglow. According to researchers, that's what savoring is, and involves some specific practices which I try to explore in length in the book and shine a light into the different nooks and crannies. There's also in the book a love story or two, along with a death or two or three. But I want to conclude with a response to what I think is an honest question that more than one has asked me about. With all the catastrophic news and personal, emotional turmoil in the world, aren't there bigger concerns than savoring awe? Aren't we sort of nudging the borderline with dawdling? It's a fair question. After all, we are still collectively metabolizing the trauma of a global pandemic with its secondary bites and stings of financial disruption, supply chain upheaval, political rancor, existential angst, and international conflict. I mean, we hardly recognize reality, doubt truth even when we know it, and in our darker moments wonder if there is such a thing as awe anymore. Nagging questions about our own selfhood and our collective identity have us reaching for sleep aids at night, and the corners and conversations in which we once found meaning seem empty, leaving us to wonder if Gertrude Stein might have been right in her famous assessment that there is no there. And comedian Bill Maher recently dubbed Bob Dylan's 1989 song, "Everything is Broken," our new national anthem. Broken switches, broken gates, broken dishes, broken parts. Streets are filled with broken hearts, broken words never meant to be spoken. Everything is broken. Seems like every time you stop and turn around, something else just hits the ground. Surely we need to concentrate in the second quarter of the 21st century on getting the economy moving forward, inflation under control, societal vitriol calmed, racism and misogyny and sexual discrimination put to rest, the climate stabilized, and at a more personal level, who among us has the mental and emotional space for awe, let alone the savoring of it? Excuse me. I think it's a fair point. We are pressed and distressed. In fact, we are increasingly depressed. The Gallup organization annually publishes a World Happiness Report that monitors the self-reported happiness of countries around the world and among a broad range of age cohorts. And the report has tracked a steady decline of happiness in the United States, especially among those under 25 years old. For all of our advancements, our whiz-bang technologies, and myriad prosperities, our smiles are fewer and our joys rarer these days. But that situation just proves the proposition. Awe, it turns out, is one of those subtle breezes that dissipates the fog. It suggests we need experiences of savoring awe more than ever. And we're talking about moments here, not hours. This isn't about extended spiritual retreats or trips to Disneyland or the adoption of a new puppy. Being open to awe involves no doctor's prescription, campaign for public office, hours on a yoga mat. It's just about simply paying enough attention each day to experience something large and wonderful and outside of yourself, and then savoring it. We are connected. The truth is, we don't simply get to experience miracles, we are part of them. And the world, the universe, needs us to remember, needs us to be awed, and to savor that awe, now more than ever. Or to live in moment-to-moment agreement with the singer-songwriter Peter Mayer, who observes the challenging thing becomes not to look for miracles, but finding where there isn't one. And so I encourage you to taste the wonder with your whole being. Scrape the fond from the bottom of life's pan and savor it. Heal at least one little part of the world by finding holiness within the whole, in everything. If Barbara Brown Taylor is correct that Earth is so thick with divine possibility that it is a wonder we can walk anywhere without cracking our shins on altars, then live your life filled with scrapes and bruises from stumbling over them in the commonest of places. Because everything is holy. You had any of those experiences? Any come to mind? Go ahead.
Well, I had one late afternoon. I was on the deck. You know, is it called murmuring when birds?
Murmuration, yeah.
Oh my gosh. And you know, and I had to turn around in circles to watch them. I just love that.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what you're talking about.
I think so.
I got one too.
Let's hear it.
You know, Kale, when he was little, my grandson, I walked into preschool, and we're walking down the sidewalk. He's ahead of me, which he always was, but he's down on his knees looking at something. There's a crack in the sidewalk, and there's a purple, I don't know what they are, but to him, a flower was growing. He found this flower growing outside. Then he saw all these cracks with flowers, and I'd never seen them. But he paid attention. And this far along, that's a moment I can't forget. And he just told me from that point, we had to stay off those flowers. So we were walking down the sidewalk and staying away from those cracks.
I make mention in the book at one point, several years ago, I was walking our grandson home from his school. I didn't think we were ever going to get home, and it's like a block away because he's stopping at, every little thing, and it might just be a cigarette butt, but he found it, utterly fascinating. But it might be a flower in a crack in the sidewalk too. I mean, but I didn't think we were ever going to make progress because everything was fascinating. It was really quite cool. When I started working with the publisher, they give you all these assignments. And one of those was, who's this for? And he said, before you answer, it's not for everyone. Anything written for everybody is written for nobody. I said, oh, great. So I got to think about this. And my initial thought was, well, I want it to be for like 20-somethings, that are kind of young enough to learn some things and And then I thought, they're not interested in that. I mean, they got other stuff on their mind, and the world is their oyster, and, you know. And it finally occurred to me, who I think it's for is for kind of middle-aged to late middle-aged people who aren't ready to retire quite yet, but can see it from here, and who are beginning to ask what I think of as the Peggy Lee question: is that all there is? And so that's kind of what I drifted toward. And then the book had no sooner come out than a former colleague of Lori's, who's in her 80s, read the book and called like the day after she finished the book and was talking about how all of a sudden she was seeing things she'd never seen. And, I don't remember her language, but it kind of lit her up in a way. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool too, that a very different age category than I had ever imagined really was genuinely affected.
Something went wrong. Please try again.
Story of my life. Also, I want to tell you about the cover of the book. If you've seen the book, it's this indeterminate human being with his or her back to the camera, so to speak, looking at Machu Picchu is what the scene is. But the backstory is the publisher's son is in the Catholic seminary somewhere, I don't know, and this a year ago was in Peru on some kind of a mission project of some sort. And he bought this painting from a street artist. And the project ended, and he came back home, and he was telling his parents about his trip, and he showed them this painting. And his dad, the publisher, said, "Yeah, I'm working on a book right now that would make a great cover for." And so I don't even know how you do this, really, but somehow they managed to track down this street artist in Peru and ask his permission to use this painting in this way. And it was funny. I mean, never one to miss an opportunity. The publisher said, "And by the way, does it have a name? If it doesn't, can we call it Savoring Awe?" Well, he was fine with all of that as long as he got he got an honorarium out of the deal. And I don't know how much good this is, but he got, some number of copies of the book. I don't know that he speaks English, and it's not translated into anything. But anyway, he, I think, was very proud that something he had done made its way in this way. And I just thought it was a wonderful symbiotic story that wound up. And I happen to love the image. So, well, let me shut up. I don't know if you have questions or comments or anything else that come to mind.
Tim, share with us, you have another book that you've published. Is it along the same lines, or?
So the first one is a memoir that captures some of the essence of our move to the country. Lori and I were two city kids, overeducated city kids, who had 2 terminal degrees, but maybe not enough sense, and we moved to the farm. Many of you know that story, but people were always asking Lori after we moved, do you walk around singing the theme song to Green Acres all the time? And her response, pretty methodically, was, "No, I go around singing the song from a chorus line, What I Did for Love." And so it's really the story of becoming acquainted with this piece of land and living there, and beyond any of our wildest imagination, finding it to be home. And so that's the first story. The first book is just that memoir, and the second one is this thought process we've been talking about.
So the next question is, will there be a number 3?
That remains to be seen, doesn't it? I hope so. I'd love to think there will be.
I I mean, I don't want this to sound sappy, but when I read the stuff that you, on
So Substack.
Substack and stuff, and when I read, it's like, I'm in awe. I'm like, how do these words flow out of your head onto paper and stuff? A lot of times I feel like I have to read it with a dictionary, but
You know, you're the first person who's ever said that.
but it just like, it brings a peace to me, and it just makes me, I don't know, the spirit is in there.
Well, thank you. On our first date, Lori and I were getting acquainted over dinner, and I'm not quite sure what the question was or how it came up, but Lori remembers that I said, I love words.
It's like, what do you like? You know, what do you like
Oh.
to do in your life? I love words.
And I don't think that's ever been a real babe magnet. But yes, I write a Substack piece weekly or so, and so that's another little enterprise. You can subscribe to it; doesn't cost anything. You know, on the off chance you want to take home a book, I'll sign it, unless that devalues the book. But I'll do that. There are copies of the first one around as well. Again, you're a real gift to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
We get the privilege of the last 2 Sundays of having somebody read parts of your book to us.
In our service.
And
Oh,
I
Doug.
think he's a
Doug,
good friend.
yes.
Yes. And we love it.
Well,
I mean,
thank you.
he puts it right in with the religion part of it. And it
Right
comes
there
out.
with the Bible, huh?
Parts of it,
Close
yes.
Timothy, yeah.
But he likes you a lot. I know that.
That's very kind of thanks. We had lunch the other day, and he told me that he was either doing it or going to do it. And
Yes.
So,
Super guy.
Alrighty, give us a minute. We'll have you line up here, and Kim will be signing books. And you can either pay for the book up there, and then get in line, or get in line and then pay for the book, whichever. This will come out, and there's pens there.
I actually brought some.
Okay, what?
What am I signing?